Okay, everyone. Welcome to the fourth in a series of webinars on the Standard Program Evaluation Protocol, otherwise known as the SPEP. Today, the emphasis will be on the logic models, and our focus is twofold, in that our viewers consist of juvenile justice professionals, to include juvenile probation officers and treatment providers, as well as community-based prevention-driven coalition members. The goal today is to provide information on how a logic model is constructed and how logic models can be useful to JPOs in understanding the program services and how they map onto the SPEP score sheet. They can help to determine service categories that a program will fit into. We hope that providers will find logic models to be a useful tool in providing structure to and describing your program as well as your anticipated outcomes. So my name is Heather Perry, and I'm a Juvenile Justice System Improvement Specialist. My co-facilitators and I are all with the Evidence-Based Prevention and Intervention Support Center, otherwise known as the EPISCenter. We're a center that's funded by the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Department of Public Welfare to provide training and technical assistance to evidence-based programs and coalitions in the field, as well as support juvenile justice system improvement across Pennsylvania. We're a project of the Prevention Resource Center, which is housed in the College of Health and Human Development here at the Pennsylvania State University. So I'll be presenting the introduction and overview of what we'll be covering today, and I'll also discuss the role logic models has as they relate to SPEP. Mary Ann DeMai is a prevention coordinator whose primary focus is strengthening families and paths, and she'll present an informative overview on the definition and purpose of logic models. Sabrina Doyle is a research coordinator, and she'll dive a little deeper and walk everyone through the process of creating a logic model. She'll provide us with examples that we can easily relate to. Finally, we'll wrap up with a question and answer session where Phyllis Law, a Communities That Care consultant, Mary Ann, Sabrina, and I will expand on things that we've covered and answer questions that we've received in the chat box. So please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A chat box at any time, and we'll be sure to answer the questions at the end. Please note that we've provided you with a number of resources that can be directly linked to by clicking on them in the bottom left corner of your screen, listed under Web Links for. So Pennsylvania has a two-pronged approach in that not only does PA promote and support evidence-based programs, but they also support the practice-based, or what we sometimes refer to as homegrown programs. The SPEP is an evidence-based rating system for measuring the expected effectiveness of programs and services for reducing delinquency rates, which in turn reduces recidivism of youth. There are many factors that go into a SPEP score, so if you need a refresher on this, you can refer back to any of the previous webinars, which are accessible through the EPISCenter website. As it relates to SPEP, logic models are used to define program services and activities, as well as how it impacts youth and families. It's important to understand that logic models are valuable for both evidence-based as well as non-evidence-based programs. Logic models can help providers clearly communicate the services they offer and how those services are expected to influence youth behavior and outcomes. They can be helpful for directing provider activities, for providing some structure for the SPEP interview process. In both cases, the logic model will help explain what's going to happen and where we're going. So, logic models are typically used by research-driven programs to promote ongoing program development and research. Some evidence-based programs already have logic models and structures in place, while homegrown programs tend to change over time to fit the needs of the probation department or the community. Therefore, they probably aren't prepackaged to include logic models, but they can benefit from using a logic model framework. You can think of SPEP as a tool that can enable homegrown programs to develop structure and enhance and strengthen their service. One of the first steps in creating structure is to break the program down into individual or primary services and then create the logic model. This is where I turn the mic over to Mary Ann and Sabrina. Their expertise will provide you with some valuable tips that will guide you in creating or improving upon your own logic model. And then I'll show you, by coming back to speak, how understanding logic models might help you prepare for the SPEP. So Mary Ann's going to discuss the definition of logic models at length. Mary Ann?
I'm really happy to be here to talk to you today about logic models. Sometimes when you hear the word logic, it seems a little intimidating. But if you think about it as a visual way, a roadmap per se, to present how you believe the activities in your program will bring about change, it seems less daunting. Logic models are simply a tool that will help clarify what your project intends to do, what it hopes to accomplish, and the impact expected. A logic model can be important to standardized program evaluation protocol, also known as the SPEP process, because it will assist in not only helping to categorize programs, but also helping to evaluate program quality and effectiveness. Okay, so let's talk about what a logic model is. Again, if you're implementing programs or designing them, you likely already know what activities or components will be a part of the program. These activities are an important part of the process. These activities or program components will link to what is often referred to as risk and protective factors, and may also fit well into the YLS domains in the Youth Level of Service Case Management Inventory used by SPEP. A risk factor increases the likelihood that a young person will become involved with problem behaviors like violence and substance abuse that then can lead to involvement in the justice system. For example, if youth lack opportunities to be involved in pro-social activities, they may be more likely to be involved in illegal activities like vandalism. On the other hand, protective factors buffer young people from the risks of becoming delinquent. So if youth have a strong connectedness to the support of families or support of adults outside of the family, they might be less likely to join gangs. If you would like more information regarding risk and protective factors, we have made resources available to you. When organizations like juvenile probation offices or children and youth services are involved, it can make the logic model make sense to a wider audience. Logic models are useful for all initiative stakeholders, including organization board members and top administrators. Collaborative organizations like Juvenile Justice Coalition, probation officers, judges and chiefs, school resource officers, and others seeking to understand your work. A logic model is a way to communicate how you believe your program will change your community target population. It's being able to say, if I do this, then this may happen. It's a theory of change. If program planners don't have a clear idea of how change will occur, the potential for learning from the initiatives is low, and selling the program as effective is a lot less likely. When they are done right, logic models can help you communicate the purpose of the program, indicate why your program is important, describe and emphasize what your outcomes will be, and provide a reference point for the program. Having a logic model lets you know when you've gone off track and whether you have gone astray, at which point you might have to rethink your logic model. So here we have just a broad kind of an example of what a logic model might look like. And I'm going to walk you through the steps. So if you have a program that as part of it you are providing social skill practice, then you might think that, or you're going to hope that it addresses a community risk factor, which is poor social skills. And when you do those social skill practices, then you're going to hope that in the short term that you've increased social skills. And then in the long term, you hope that you're going to see decreased problem behaviors overall within your community. The purpose of a logic model is, again, to provide some information, and it will also allow you to know more about what your program is, either through prior research, outcomes that you've already documented, or outcomes others have documented. Logic models are based on knowledge about a program or activity that can be gained from a lot of different ways. It might be through professional experience, through the research literature, background information from your key informants, future projections that you think will happen, and other sources like results from the YLS or the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. A good logic model relies on clearly defining a need and developing an understanding of a program and problem. Once you have an understanding of the problem and steps to reduce the problem, you can create this, if I do this, then I can expect change in this area. It's a framework that will allow you to focus on realistic outcomes. As part of the SPEP process, a logic model can really help you drill down a plan to evaluate the quality of a program once it has been categorized. It may even help provide some clarity as you work through the categorization process. Logic models better position programs for success because you are able to describe the sequence of activities throughout and to bring about change and how these activities are linked to the results the program is expected to achieve. If you use a logic model, you are more likely to have an effective program. A logic model provides a template that can lead to learning more about why your program works or doesn't, and provides better documentation of outcomes. The logic model is a beneficial tool that facilitates effective program planning, implementation, and evaluation, as well as play an important role in sustainability. When it comes to implementation activities, when you develop a logic model, you will have a clear plan of the resources and activities that you need for implementation. This clear plan helps you deliver the program consistently and in a quality manner each time, which are important steps for the SPEP process. This consistency is important for evidence programs. It's often referred to as fidelity. If you are not consistent, you may not get the results that you expect. When it comes to program evaluation, having a clear sense of what you want or expect to change allows you to develop tools that help measure the change that you are looking for. Program evaluation is an important part of the logic model because it is tied to quality and accountability. You will be able to say with some assurance that because you provided the program consistently or with fidelity, and that you collected the data that you planned around your outcomes, that you might get the change that you want or expect, or not. And if not, then that's at a point where you'll need to reevaluate your program. When thinking about sustainability, if you can communicate what your program is all about, a logic model really makes that easier. You will have laid the groundwork for marketing your program and having stakeholders commit to keeping the program going or sustained in your community. Wouldn't it be great to say that to potential funders that you will or expect to be able to reduce the number of juvenile court cases? A logic model needs to convey how your program works, so often describe the activities of your program, what your target risk and protective factors are, and what you want your short and long-term outcomes to be. Because logic models often reflect the local community's needs and programs, there is no one-fits-all cookie-cutter approach. However, logic models often have a similar framework. A logic model is not likely to be developed in a 2-hour setting, or even 2 such meetings. Therefore, you should invest some time in creating a logic model. Consider having a series of short meetings with the project team over the period of a few weeks. You will want to make sure that you keep the momentum going so that completing the model is consistent and that the team stays engaged. Logic models are best built as a team. A logic model design team should include groups of individuals who are committed to the goals of the organization and are willing to contribute to the logic model development over time. Could include key stakeholders or those who will help promote and support the program, people in the community that can help identify risk and protective factors, so that might be a CTC or prevention coalition, juvenile justice boards, judges, etc. Organizational leaders that can provide input on the resources that are available is important as well. Program staff, those are the ones that know the program in and out, are also important to include. All these team members are necessary to gain a clear understanding of program goals, assets, and commitments. When building a logic model, you often see them in two different domains, or do two different types. One is organization specific, and another is program specific. Organizational specific are complex, often reflect a strategic plan, and they're often made up after you've considered what program specific logic models look like. So the program specific logic models are like the puzzle pieces to an organizational specific model. And today we're going to focus on program specific models. So when you think about logic models, here's an example of the aggression replacement training logic model, often referred to as ART. And this first slide of the ART is just a broad overview of what the model will look like. And so you'll see that there are program components, and that those program components are more broad, that there are targets, and those targets are just decreasing and increasing protective factors, again, lacking detail, and that your proximal or short-term outcome are enhanced levels of moral reasoning. So if you address moral reasoning training, generally, you're going to address targets of risk and protective factors, and then you may expect to see enhanced levels of moral reasoning in the short term, and then in the long term, you will hope to see some improved social behavior overall in your community. Looking at your model more specifically, it gets to the nitty-gritty of what takes place. The program components, sometimes referred to as modalities, and then the risk and protective factors that the program is designed to address. It is the organization's guide for implementing activities and tracking outcomes. Here's how it works. If I provide moral reasoning training by providing opportunities, and that would be under the modalities, for discussions around moral dilemmas, then I can hope to improve social skills. I will know that I have improved social skills because students are responding to group pressures appropriately in the short term. And in the long term, this will help to reduce aggressive and delinquent behavior. So now that we have told you some about what a logic model is, why it is important, and some general ideas about building a logic model, Sabrina is going to walk you through the specifics of creating a logic model. So Sabrina?
Hi all. I noticed that we have some new participants joining, so welcome. We're glad you could join us today. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about exactly how to create your own logic model. And this comic, of course, is just one that points out, you know, a lot of times what happens is kids come into our program and they leave and they're either better or not. You know, and in some ways it's very messy to say exactly what occurred, right? In this case, somebody's saying, well, then a miracle occurs, right? But what happens in these programs is not happening because of a miracle, but rather because of something you're doing. And the purpose of this logic model is to explain exactly what it is that you're doing that's making the changes happen for your community. So one rabbit hole people sometimes go down when trying to make a logic model is to try and make one that fits the entire organization without going through each piece first. As Mary Ann said before, you know, organizational logic models are more along the lines of strategic plans or broad overviews of exactly what it is that your organization is providing. Whereas what we're going to be talking about today is really chunking out and breaking down the individual pieces of your program in order to really be able to say what each one of those pieces affect. Once you figure out what each individual component or piece affects, then you can more easily go back and create that larger logic model or plan for your overall organization. So just a few things to think about when you're creating a logic model. You know, people have a tendency to try a kitchen sink approach when logic modeling, which means they try and cram everything that they're doing and everything it could possibly affect in. This is not what you want to do here. Creating a logic model gives you a chance to focus on what you think the core or necessary components of necessary components of the program are, what you are targeting with those components, and what outcomes you expect to get in the short and long term as a result of targeting those things. So again, your logic model should be focused on what is being done with the person receiving the services. And most folks, I think, that are here today are people who serve youth. So really it should be targeted around what is happening for the youth that's receiving the service. Another thing to keep in mind is that your program targets are really a way to describe how you are getting your outcomes. What are you doing that's leading to your outcomes? Now again, this is the direction, which is not the same as the destination. It's not about the end goal where you want to be. It's about how you're going to get there. Another thing is short-term outcomes that you list on your logic model should be things that you are measuring or plan to measure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about creating an individual logic model. And finally, long-term outcomes, as Marianne had indicated before as well, these are your desired outcomes for the future, and they should be based in research, experience, or if possible, actual data from your program. So now let's walk through a logic model. So for the purposes of this practice, what I did was I took one piece of the organizational structure, one piece, one component that I'm doing, which in my case I'm calling my victim offender mediation program. So keep in mind, it can be quite overwhelming to create a logic model if you get too bogged down. As Marianne stated before, this is a process that takes time and multiple people's input to really do well. But when you start, just start at anywhere that you can, but start off by listing the process or program components that you have that you think are most necessary for the program that you are running. So in my program, there are three main components. First off, a preparatory meeting for the victim and the offender. Second off, facilitated meetings between the victim and the offender. And finally, the creation of a restitution agreement. So in my example here, I believe both the preparatory meeting and the facilitated meeting that will happen one time and will take approximately 2 hours each. Keep in mind, this is an example and not a recommendation. In this case, I'm just attempting to, as best as I can, identify how much of each component is necessary for my program. So in talking about the modality, in individual meetings, the primary focus is on the victim learning how to tell their story and the offender learning how to hear what the victim is going to say. The modality for the facilitated meetings, hopefully, are that the offender can hear how the crime impacted the victim, they can offer apologies to the victim, and again, hopefully that the victim may offer forgiveness to that offender. And then finally, the last piece is the creation of a restitution agreement, whereas it is drawn up in a way that satisfies the victim. If everything is done in my program correctly, if all of my components are offered, then I believe that that will help me reach certain targets. The targets for this program are fivefold. First off, the primary risk factors we are trying to address are a lack of understanding of the crime's impact and favorable attitudes towards the antisocial behavior. We're hoping if kids see the impact of their behavior, they may think twice before doing it in the future. Also, we're trying to target protective factors as well. Specifically, we're trying to target empathy, where the offender can understand what it is that they have done. We are also trying to target accountability for actions. I assume that by taking part in this process, that the youth will understand and become more accountable for what they have done. And finally, through the preparatory meeting, I also believe that it will enhance the communication and listening skills for the person, for the offender who is taking part in those meetings. For the audience who's here today that uses YLS, these types of things may sound familiar. For the most part, all of these activities fall under the YLS category of attitudes, values, and beliefs. In this way, you could say that overall the program would be good, especially for kids who are at risk in that area. If I address all these targets as I believe that I will with my program, then I believe that it will translate into short-term outcomes, often talked about as the word proximal. As you hear the words proximal and distal, they always refer to outcomes, and I always remember proximal by thinking about proximity or being close by. We normally check for proximal outcomes shortly after administering the program. So that would be if you're delivering a post-test immediately upon completion of the program, that would be a short-term outcome. Distal outcomes are actually expected to come sometime later. In research, this is often 6 months or more after the end of services. So for this program, I think that there will be, and I did notice we do have a question on that has come up, and I want to let you know we will be addressing all of these at the end. Thank you for keeping that going. So in this particular program, the short-term outcomes include the creation of a signed restitution agreement, increased empathy for the victim, increased accountability for their actions, and reduced favorable attitudes towards antisocial behavior. If I accomplish all my short-term outcomes, then I also believe I will have long-term or distal outcomes that I will impact as well. Those include, in my case, completion of restitution by the offender for the victim, decreased recidivism for the offender, and improved prosocial behavior as well. Anytime you read one of these outcomes, you should be thinking of the words as measured by. So, for example, if I say that my short-term goal is to increase accountability for actions, I may be measuring it by a pre-post survey asking before and after the mediation whether the offender believes that his or her actions were acceptable given the circumstances. My long-term outcomes of decreased recidivism would be measured by reviewing archival data to see if they reoffended for the same crime within a year of receiving this program. So there are a few other things to remember. You cannot control what happens with your program. You can only control what you offer. When you're writing this logic model, you need to think about it as the optimal or Cadillac version of this particular aspect of the program. What I mean by that is, again, using our current example, I've stated that part of my program components include the creation of a restitution agreement. Now, it is possible for someone to do this victim offender mediation and not reach that agreement. But in that case, I would say that if there was no agreement reached, then the offender participating in this program would not reach all of the desired outcomes. Not just that they wouldn't reach those short-term outcomes of creation of a signed restitution agreement and the long-term outcomes of completion of that agreement, but also that they probably don't have the other pieces like increased accountability for actions or increased empathy for the victim. A separate issue to consider would be that if most of the kids are not getting the full program, in other words, if they don't always, if most of the kids aren't reaching an agreement, then there may be another problem with the program itself, and you may need to either revisit your model or revisit what's happening before the program is taking place. That is where training comes in. The one last final piece of your program that doesn't necessarily make it entirely on the logic model is the training that occurs before and during the program. You don't necessarily detail out everything, but having it detailed somewhere is important. Some examples of this include the training that occurs before the program, manuals or guides that you create to make sure that the program is done according to your model, and the supervision that's given to the people administering the program to help make sure that drift doesn't occur. All of these pieces will be looked at during the SPEP process. So next, I'd like to go ahead and turn this presentation back over to Heather. She's going to talk to you a little bit more about how this logic model process truly relates with the standardized program evaluation protocol process. All right, thanks, Heather.
Okay, so as we take a look at the big picture, you may be able to understand the connection between logic models and SPEP. In order to do this, let's briefly refer back to the SPEP score sheet here. I'm just going to note that if you need more information on the SPEP score sheet, you can refer back to the EPISCenter website. So the first section here refers to the primary and supplemental service types. A logic model can help your SPEP interviewing team unpack the program and figure out what service or services are being offered. The service type or service types will fit into one of these three broad service type categories here. The next section refers to the quality of service, which is broken down into 4 sections, which are listed here on the right. These quality pieces are embedded throughout the logic model, and we've been mentioning those throughout the whole webinar. The third section of the SPEP score sheet measures the duration and dosage of service each youth receives. The standards vary as they're dependent on the service type, and they would be found broadly in the program component section, or more specifically in the modalities section of the logic model. The final component of SPEP measures the youth level of service, or YLS, which measures the youth level of risk and is often referred to as the broad target on a logic model. So we can easily connect the 4 components of SPEP to Sabrina's victim offender program logic model when we proceed through the SPEP interview process. So typically one of the first things the SPEP interviewer does is ask the provider for a description of the service so they can try to figure out, again, what the primary and supplementary service type or types are. Or we're going to ask you, what do most kids get most of the time? As a line staff, what do you do and what is your role? You'll note here that not only does this section describe what's being done, but it also includes how is it being done. Since the recommended duration and dosage depend on the service type, it makes sense then that the amount of service would also fall under this section. The quality piece of SPEP connects to the entire logic model from beginning to end. So if you think about what the overall components for determining quality are, you'll see that it's embedded throughout. You can think about a logic model as a SPEP schematic that summarizes the program's protocol. The logic model helps you know what data to measure and to collect. If you aren't collecting data on the youth being served, how do you know your program's being effective? If you're not asking the folks you're serving, like the juvenile probation officer or the youth or the parents or the schools, how to improve your program, then you might miss an opportunity for growth and progress. The other thing you're not hearing is what you're doing right, and what are you doing well. So although you may not see training, as Sabrina mentioned, specifically listed in the program component section, it is an important part of the program delivery and fidelity. All of the pieces associated with training are key factors and an essential part of the SPEP quality process. What I'm referring to is the manualization, building fidelity and consistency, and providing ongoing training and documentation. So lastly, the targets column can be directly linked back to the YLS and the 8 domains or needs of those youth being served, as Sabrina mentioned. We strongly encourage that the JPOs make the entire YLS report available to the provider so the service can be tailored to address the youth's goals, which will hopefully be specific and meaningful to that youth. This is where the youth feels the buy-in and can open themselves up to make the changes to reach the goals or produce the outcomes that we're all looking for. So logic models can be very useful and very helpful in the SPEP process, as well as a way to provide organization and structure to your program. So this is the conclusion of the presentation piece, and we'll now move into the question and answer phase. If you have any additional questions that haven't been typed into the chat box, please feel free to type them in now.
So I noticed here that we've had one person ask the question of, can you define modality? Overall, a modality is really just a way to describe in more detail what it is that you think is happening when you're delivering a certain component. So for example, if you're doing, say, group therapy, you may offer 12 sessions of group therapy. The modality really will kind of pin down what exactly you're offering through the course of those 12 sessions. Does that make sense? One other thing that I did want to address, just wanted to point out, is that while you all did see the logic model today for my victim offender mediation program, what you may not have seen is that, you know, during the SPEP process, you would bring each logic model that you have created. As I said before, you may have one created for each component, you know, for each piece of the services that you're offering. So all of those would come to the table during the SPEP process.
Are there any other questions?
We do have another question here. Just a moment. So the question is, how does SPEP, a residential treatment facility, when we utilize both evidence-based and homegrown programs? Heather, I'm going to turn that over to you to ask or to answer.
Well, with regard to a residential treatment facility, we would go into the facility and we would have to unpack the treatment facility because typically in residential treatment facilities there are multiple services. So we would have to go in and determine which services the treatment facility is providing to the youth. And there really is not much of a difference when we're SPEPing, whether it's evidence-based or homegrown. So if I didn't answer your question, maybe you can clarify what the question
I would add to that, though, that the logic, I think one of the blessings or the glories of a logic model is that it can help you really kind of provide a structure and communication around what your homegrown program is. So it allows other people to understand exactly what it is that you're delivering and how it and what you expect to address and the outcomes that you expect. With the evidence-based programs, they often, not always, but they often have a logic model already in existence that you might be able to use or tweak a little bit. So logic models are good for both.
So I just want to point out, just to follow up on what Mary Ann was saying, there's two different pieces. So in utilizing an evidence-based program, one of the things to think about is even if that program already has a logic model, you're going to want to really take a look at that logic model for that program and see whether or not it truly fits what it is that you're doing. In some cases, people do have to tweak the program slightly in order to make it fit into the other services that they're offering. So that's one of the things that you want to think about doing. Another thing that I just want to bring up about that is, again, in your organization, you can be running multiple different types of programs. So in this case, during the SPEP process, you may bring to the table your information on that evidence-based program that you're running, as well as bringing another logic model to the table that's on the homegrown program that you're using as well. So we have another question here. Can you talk about how logic model structures differ, e.g. different headings, flow, outcomes? So I believe that what you might, I'm not sure I totally understand that question. I think that what you might be asking is about how we did talk about how you can there are multiple different ways to create a logic model. The one that we used today is the one that kind of encompasses everything that we would hope to see within, encompassed within a logic model that was going to be used also for SPEP purposes. There are others, and I'm just going to see if I can scroll back here to where I can show you the ART logic model again. Now, this one does tend to have the same pieces. Other times you will see that people will list out all of the different program component. Basically, the program components and program modalities are sometimes collapsed on people's logic models. That's one way that I've seen it done before. I encourage that if you're interested in looking at different logic models or how they're created, we do have a lot of logic models on the EPISCenter website for evidence-based programs. And in general, if you look up logic models that are done by program developers, you'll see that each one can be might be slightly different. Always, though, what you need to do with a logic model is think about it in that if-then format. So if this happens, then we expect this. If this happens, then we expect this, just in terms of making sure to create your flow.
There is a resource on the resource page that connects to the Kellogg Foundation that provides a slightly different model than what we used here that would but does generally have the same components. But that might be a resource also to look at that can give you some different ideas about what a model might look like.
Right. And I just put that up for you if you would like to. And these resources will also be available at the end of the webinar on the EPISCenter website if you want to take a look at that again. Are there any other questions that people have, either about logic modeling or about other things related to how this relates to the SPEP process? Okay. Well, what we're going to do is Phyllis Law is going to talk to you just a little bit more about other ways this might be used as well.
Hello. I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you as an organization to become involved with your local coalitions. Sometimes I think when we get into the work that we do, we forget that there is a bigger, larger audience for what we are actually doing. The work that we do, especially, is targeted as much of the work that you do in your residential arenas and working directly with high-risk youth. There is a place that all of this work around your logic modeling that you would do is a perfect fit with coalition work, because it will help you and your organization really understand where you fit within a strategic plan, an overall prevention kind of planning, but also looking at different arenas within the community. There may be different areas that your organization will fit that can help you expand your horizons as well. On the website, we do have a listing under the Communities That Care section of coalitions that we work directly with. But I encourage you to seek out and explore those coalitions that are in your areas and find where a good fit for you, for your organization, for the program, and not look at it as, oh, here's one more meeting that I can check a box and be a part of, but to go and share this information that these logic models are really going to help you be able to talk about what you do, the groups you serve, how the work you do really affects the overarching part of the community, because that is very, very important. And to be mindful, there are many, many different kinds of coalitions in today's world within the communities. I think that the main thing is to find the best fit for you, find how, and the other thing is that there's, I'm sure, looking at your coalitions, looking at folks around those tables that can help you with this logic modeling process, because there are a lot of experts in the field. So I do encourage you to take a look at that. We would be happy if you have questions to contact me. And if you have questions about who you could connect with or where would be the best place to go, and I'd be happy to help you.
Okay, so this about wraps up webinar 4. And what I'd like to note here is that we have a 5th webinar scheduled for Friday, February 21st at 11 a.m., where we are going to have an overview and review of SPEP with an open forum question and answer session to follow. More specific information on webinar 5 will be forthcoming. So the next thing I'd like to ask everyone to do is to complete an evaluation. The evaluation form is located here in the lower left side. Evaluations are used to help us come up with ideas for future webinars as well as for professional development. And I also wanted to say that the EPISCenter website, for those of you who don't have it, is listed here. The screen now consists of all of our emails. So if you have questions that you haven't been able to write into the chat box, or you prefer to email us separately, you're more than welcome to email any of us. And if you miss our emails here, our contact information is also located on the website. And again, here are the additional resources that we brought up again. So please don't forget to fill out those evaluations, and we just want to thank you again for your time and attention. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you all.